Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. This is Adam Huss coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Thanks so much for listening. For a long time, my winery, Centralis, has been the sole sponsor for the Organic Wine Podcast. In considering sponsorship options, I've rejected the most common possibilities in order to stay true to my values and the ecological approach I try to promote with each episode. I'm pretty picky, I guess you could say. I want any sponsors that I bring on to meet the same kind of standards that I have for my guests. That is, I want them to be companies that uphold the values of this podcast and toe the line ecologically, and to attempt to make the world a better place, ideally. I finally met a couple potential sponsors that not only fit well with this podcast, but whose services I think can genuinely improve the quality of your life. First, I'm thrilled to tell you about Catavino Tours. Catavino Tours provides luxury travel, wine, and food tours in Portugal and Spain. And rather than reading a script about them, I asked the founder, Ryan Opaz, to answer a few questions for me. Ryan, it's really great to introduce you to folks. Could you talk a little bit about who you are and what Catavino is?
Definitely. Thanks for having me. I'm Ryan Opaz. I run a company called Catavino Tours. It was born out of 15 years of writing about Spanish and Portuguese wine while living in Spain and Portugal. Today I live in Porto, capital of the north of Portugal, where I run a luxury food and wine-focused travel company. And we focus a lot on farm to table, natural wine producers, organic wine producers, sustainable travel as best we can, knowing that travel can sometimes not be so sustainable.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned that, because shouldn't we all be flying less? I mean, how does tourism in general fit into the lives of those of us who are trying to reduce our carbon footprint?
That's a great question, and one I've been struggling with for quite a few years. It was about 3 to 4 years ago that we took on some offices in downtown Porto where we installed a tasting room and a natural and organic wine shop. And as that shop grew and I started to become more and more vested in the industry, at least this side of the industry, let's say, I realized there's a lot of things in wine that's not so sustainable, including tourism. And it has been a struggle running a company to keep a clean conscience. And I won't say that I've successfully figured that out, but we are this year working on a plan to reduce all of the carbon footprint of all of our tours, including using some very well-vetted and well-researched offsetting tools. But more importantly, we're working to create tours that we believe not only are fun, enjoyable, and a good time, but they also help people to learn a little bit more about the planet and how they can help take care of it. So I believe, as much as it's hard to say as somebody who owns a travel business, I do hope that we as a society taken up the quality of our travel experiences and lower the amount of them. That can be by taking longer trips and going deeper. That can be taking less trips, long distance and more local trips. But I think what we can offer somebody who makes their one trip a year, hopefully abroad, the long haul flight, we hope that we can make that trip something that you're going to get more out of than just a little bit of relaxation and a few nice glasses of wine. You might learn a little bit. You'll have the opportunity to meet people with new perspectives. You meet the locals. You taste the local foods, local wines. You learn a little bit about the culture so that you can go back and hopefully make a small difference wherever you are in the world. And in that way, hopefully make things a little bit better for everyone.
Thanks. That's actually a really great answer. You're probably one of the few people who have a tourism business that would say to travel less. So I think that's what I like about you, Ryan. Thank you. If you're considering a wine tour in Portugal and Spain and want to have that experience be more meaningful and conducted by a company who is thoughtful about their ecological impact, check out Catavino Tours by going to catavinotors.com/OWP for Organic Wine Podcast. That's CATAVINO tours.com/OWP. And your tour will not only benefit you, but this podcast as well. I'll list that link in the show notes as well. Thank you for being thoughtful about your travel. And they are currently booking for their October harvest experience with sustainable and natural wineries, so check that out. My guest for this episode is Mike Appolo, and he tells us all about how he is growing a no-spray vineyard in New Hampshire, less than an hour from Boston. Yes, I said no spray. You may have heard it's impossible. You may smugly reject the possibility of success, but Mike is growing wine grapes in New England without sprays and has been for over a decade at his estate winery, Appolo Vineyards. Appolo Vineyards was just this month named New Hampshire's first winery in the Sustainable Craft Beverage Recognition Program. After listening to this interview, I think you'll agree that it's a well-deserved honor. Mike is growing wine grapes in a place where summers are hot and humid, winters can be brutal, and wild turkeys are one of the birds that regularly eat your grapes. It's also a place of beautiful wines. Listen closely to what Mike says, but also what's behind what he says. There's something rock steady about Mike. He seems undaunted by the numerous challenges inherent in what he's doing. I think this is guided in part by a humility and an openness to learning, both from other vintners and from nature itself. Another part of this is valuing the legacy that he is building. It's a legacy of valuing the life and health of his world over easy profit, and he's showing that it's not only possible, but delicious. Enjoy. Mike, welcome. Thank you so much for this conversation. Looking forward to it.
Me too, Adam. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, could you just start by saying where you are and what's it like outside where you are right now?
Oh, actually, it's a pretty warm day. We
Oh,
have pretty diverse
nice.
weather. We're it's about 50 degrees, but it's not typically that temperature here. I'm 35 miles north of Boston, so we're in southern New Hampshire, about
Okay.
I would say 7 or 8 miles from the border, from the southern border of
Nice.
New Hampshire. Yeah,
Yeah. Appolo Vineyards is what you is where you are. Is that right? Are you at the vineyards? Are you at the winery?
yeah, yeah. So I
Okay.
live on the property. It's a 200 plus year old farm that I bought in 2001. And um, at that point, it hadn't been a farm since the 70s or so. And at that point, there were a bunch of animals and so on the farm, all kinds of plants, all kinds of things grown here. And in the interim, there just had been some horses, goats, and chickens, not much more than that.
Lovely. And I'll just tease a little bit where we'll head with this conversation, but we met at Vitinord, and I think just in the course of chatting and meeting people, what I do and what my values are with this podcast and everything, sort of, I probably said something about that. I don't know if you remember better than I do, but you were immediately like, "Oh, well, I'm doing a no spray vineyard in New Hampshire," and I was immediately like, "I would love to talk more about that."
Yeah,
um, and it's no secret that this is the direction that I think all agriculture should head. I think it's like where agriculture always was for millennia until the modern era, until the last century,
exactly.
really. And we figured out how to do it for thousands and thousands of years, and suddenly now we're I don't know, I guess addicted to chemicals, but um, you are not, and I want to get into that in a little bit. But since you brought up getting this farm, I mean, what was that inspiration? Were you working in Boston and just wanted to get out, or are you from New Hampshire? What inspired getting this farm and that move in your life?
There's a bit more history to it than that. I
Ah, okay.
grew up in Pennsylvania, and
Oh, me too.
I was always growing things. I helped my grandmother in the garden, and she had nut trees and all kinds of things. She grew tomatoes and all kinds of things for the table. And uh, from I grew up. It's kind of northeastern Pennsylvania near the Scranton area, and uh, from there I went off to college and got an undergraduate degree in engineering, and was commissioned a second lieutenant in the Air Force. So I started traveling at that point when I went active duty. And so in 1989, I moved to Southwest Germany and lived there until the fall of 92, where
Ah,
I got to know about wine. And
ah,
so I knew nothing about the whole wine culture, knew nothing about how wine was grown, how wine was made until I was in that in Europe, living in Europe, and at kind of a pivotal point in history when the Berlin Wall fell, when
yeah.
the Operation Desert Storm was going on, and so on. And from from there, I moved to Colorado Springs for a couple of years. And in what was happening in 1992 through 1994 that I lived in Colorado Springs is there were a whole bunch of craft breweries opening.
Oh
So they
yeah.
were opening up. That was one of the Key places there were when I left the Air Force, I decided to move to New Hampshire because I thought it was a lovely place to live. I thought I wanted to raise a family here. And uh, I remember visiting as a teenager and then several different times for different reasons. Uh, One was to deliver potato chips with my stepfather. And the next time I was installing computer networks at the same places for Wise Potato Chips. And I don't know whether we can use a brand on here, but
No, that's fine.
uh,
It's a
and so
Pennsylvania brand, isn't
yes, it is. Yeah.
it?
So and that potato chip plant was in the same town that my grandmother lived in Pennsylvania,
Oh
a
yeah.
place called Berwick. And so I thought, Hampshire's a nice place. I got a job with a government contractor in Boston and moved to New Hampshire and quickly realized the commute was terrible.
Mm.
So I went to work for a software company here for the next 20 years. And
Oh wow.
towards the end of that time, I had originally planted a bunch of fruit trees on this property and then moved them around the property to make them more decorative because there are a lot of, they're not very there are very sensitive to especially mildews and
Yeah.
apple scab and things like that. So I moved those around, but grapes, it turned out that grapes were not as susceptible, or at least certain grapes were not as susceptible. So in 2006 or so, I started planting this vineyard, and then throughout the years, excuse me a second. Throughout the years, I um, realized that certain varieties of grapes were much more susceptible, and other ones were a lot less susceptible. So we've constantly, what we call in the military, taller tapped. The better one goes forward, and
What
um,
what was that term? Can you repeat
tall.
that?
When you line up in the military, we call it taller tap. The taller guys stand in the back, and the shorter guys stand in the front, so that the little guys aren't looking, in the middle of somebody's back.
Right,
So
right,
it's kind of a sorting process, and you can
right.
self sort yourself pretty quickly in a group like that by taller tap. But the way I kind of think about it in terms of grapevines is if there's a better one to grow there, it's going to get removed, and we'll put it something else there.
Yeah.
And so for this last these last few years, I've been taking out all the varieties that just really didn't do very well here. And the last one I pulled out was a grape called Niagara,
Uh-huh.
and replaced it with a Minnesota hybrid called Itasca, which is
Oh
supposedly
yeah.
much more resilient.
Have you found that
And
to be true yet, or is it too early to say?
way too early to say. So
Okay, got
uh,
it.
it's I have some of its family members, let's just say the Frontenac, all three Frontenacs, which grow here without spraying. And a task is supposed to be more hardy than that. So I have high hopes for these grapes.
Got it. Okay. Now, so other than sort of this gradual progression, you moved there really just because you wanted to live there, and then started observing fruit trees. Were you growing things besides apple? What were you growing in terms of fruit trees?
Oh yeah, so some of the plants that were here. So I had recently met some of the people that lived on this property when in the 1950s through the 1970s. So they're all my parents' age, so they're in their upper 70s and lower 80s. And some of the plants that their parents and grandparents planted on this property are still here. So there was a
Ah,
grapevine here that is probably over 100 years old right now.
do you know
That
what it is?
It's kind of a wild
Oh, okay.
Concord grape style.
Got
It
it.
goes into
Yep.
one of our sweeter wines.
Okay.
I have it trained up over a pergola, so it provides a lot of nice shade. Great
Yeah.
smell in September when it's ripening.
Nice.
But things, kind of random things. There are some blueberry bushes are here. There are a rhubarb patch that this woman's mother, or these people's mother, planted here,
Uh-huh.
are still growing here. And then a lot of flowering plants are still growing here that have been growing here. I've seen pictures that are 100 years old of this property, and the same plants are in the same place.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's
So
and they're nice decorative plants, so there's no reason to move them, and they don't need to be touched.
right. I love that. That sounds like permaculture to me.
Yeah.
So you're just observing what's already there and planting some of your own fruit trees, probably for your own devices, I imagine,
Yeah.
and just noticing, the mildew pressures, the fungus pressures that you're getting. And I mean, did you have any training in this sense of, like permaculture training or anything like that, that would make you think along these lines of how to just build a resilient, ecosystem for your fruits? Or was that just a natural thing? I mean, I'm just curious what your values or thought process was as you started thinking about, growing vines more specifically.
So I'm a voracious reader. So I read quite a variety of things, and often I'll have three or four things going in parallel. And one of the books that I read when I first started getting into this is called The Grape Grower by Lon Rumbaugh. And
Okay.
so he is in a different part of the world. He was in Oregon, and he bred different grapevines. He talked about characteristics and what was necessary for growing grapevines organically in Oregon, I believe is where he was from.
Uh-huh.
And uh, then I started kind of branching out, dealing with other people that are growing grapes and the University of New Hampshire system. And everybody told me that I was doing a fool's errand by trying to go after something organic in this very humid in the summertime. It's very humid conditions here and hot.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I just kind of said that can't be completely true because some of the first grapevines I planted are still in the ground and have never been sprayed with anything.
Right.
And the only thing I ever sprayed was on the Niagara. I'd sprayed some copper to fight back the mildew, but
Uh-huh.
sometimes it takes black. So what we fight the most is this. It's called black rot, where the
Right.
fruit turns black and almost looks like it's been burned. It shrivels. It's not even raisins. It shrivels and it's hard black and
Mm.
just becomes a whole bunch of grapes that look like they've been burned.
Wow.
And fighting that back year after year it's just not a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
No matter what you do culturally for it, it doesn't seem to make a difference in how fast. And the vine grows very fast too. So there's lots of leaves. There's lots of very big leaves shading the fruit, and it's hard to get out in the sunlight, which is one of the methods we use to get the fruit to sanitize itself. Basically, the sun
Right.
sanitizing the fruit.
So black rot is, as I understand it, there are quite a few varieties with resistances to the downy, powdery, things like that. But black rot does seem to be the sort of Achilles heel of even some of the better cold hardy hybrid resistant varieties. But that
Right.
really is the only solution, is what you're saying. There isn't like any cultural practices, whether it's like hedging or leaf pulling, or I mean, sounds like sun exposure is one helpful thing, but it sounds like, if you have a week of hot, rainy weather in the summer, that's gonna it's not gonna help with the sun exposure.
Yes.
And so so you really do need an internal resistance from the plant itself to be able to combat it. It sounds like, is that what you're getting at?
Uh, Yeah, exactly what I'm getting at. And so
Yeah.
a lot of these plant catalogs, nursery catalogs, Lon Rumbaugh's website had a list of, you know, what are these plants resistant to? What are these leaves resistant to? What is the fruit resistant to? And so I started doing research into, trying a bunch of different things, both from the University of Minnesota and from Cornell, about what I should try to grow here. And quickly settled on, I planted a small block. I would say it's about 200 vines, and saw what worked and what didn't, and start pulling out what didn't. Uh,
Uh-huh.
for instance, a grape like Traminette would just set fruit in black rot almost immediately,
Uh, yep.
and Brianna, I've never seen black rot on it at all.
Ah,
And so I've grown it since 2006.
wow.
In and 2021 and 2022 were about as opposite of years you could get here.
Yeah.
21, we got hit by 4 hurricanes. It rained. I tell everybody it rained only twice in July, once for 14 days and once for 16 days, because it just didn't ever seem to stop. So we had already had fruit set, and then it rained, rain, 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 rain. And
Oh,
then,
yeah.
towards the end of the year, we had hurricane after hurricane sweep through. It devastated places like Long Island and and it's where I source some of my grapes, and the Hudson River Valley in New York, where I source some of my grapes. It devastated some of them because they got so much rain at a time we
Yeah.
were trying to ripen the fruit.
Right.
But um, I was pretty well off here, and I thought that's pretty cool that now that the vines are up to, a lot of them are over 10 years old now. They're uh, they're pretty resilient in what they do.
Wow. So how? So you were starting to talk about, you read that book, the Grape Grower, and then I mean, what it was? So was that it? Basically, just a bunch of reading informed these ideas. I mean, was there a moment when you're like, you know what, I'm gonna make a commitment to this? Like, because imagine if you spray copper once, I don't know, I mean, like, at least you're thinking about it. It's a possibility. You're maybe
Right.
trying to be organic, but you have some tools you can work with. At what point did you just say, you know what, no, I'm just gonna let nature take its course?
Well, it kind of got there on a variety of different levels. There are, I just think generally we try to use uh, and to use the human algorithm or the human analog. If you use antibiotics for everything that ails you, you will be resistant to nothing.
Right.
So I kind of feel the same way about plants. If you don't let them try to tackle the challenges that they face, you're just going to make the plant weaker and weaker.
Right.
And so, the second part of that is I like to be mindful about what I put in my body and how I eat and how my children eat and the land my children walk on and my grandchildren walk on, and the the dogs for that matter. The dog, you don't want to exclude them from chasing turkeys out of the vineyard, which
Right.
is
Right.
the real thing.
Yeah. They're part of the pest control, right?
They absolutely are. Yeah, and they hear the word turkeys and they perk up, and they actually they could see part of the vineyard out the south door, and they have a certain whine when there are turkeys out there. Uh, it's different than squirrels, and it's different than groundhogs. There's different animals kind of come through.
They have,
Uh,
and
tur-
they
tur-
they have a
Turkeys,
special wine for each one.
yeah. Well, mostly turkeys.
I
Uh,
gotcha.
they know that I set them loose to chase the turkeys. I might not set them loose on a squirrel because squirrels will run into the road. Turkeys will
Oh
fly
yeah.
up into the trees and up on the
Right.
up on the buildings, and so they're a little safer. They're not, and they go up and out, and the dogs don't run across the road to get them. Hopefully.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Oh, I see what you're saying. Like the dogs would follow the squirrels into the road, which would not
Oh
be
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Do you have raccoons or deer as an issue as well?
We do. The deer seem to be more of a problem at both ends of the growing year. So right after bud break, they like the nice, soft, uh, fresh shoots of the vines. And there are
Right.
places, the kind of the way I've done the trellising is on the outsides of the vineyard. I run wires really low to the ground, so that the deer can't step through. So
Oh,
they
okay.
are a bit of a problem, but they're also a problem kind of at the very end of the season with the ripe fruit. And
Uh-huh.
and especially the past 2 years, there's the southeast corner of our vineyard. It's kind of it's not visible from the house, but it's behind the winery. It's blocked by the view of the winery, and so the deer get down there and they eat, and you can tell that they've been eating because there's just a swath that's maybe 2 or 3 feet wide, and all the grapes on those right there are eaten.
Uh, yeah.
So uh, we have other methods of chasing the deer out of here. I mean, I like to let the dogs loose for them too, but dogs are a little bit confused by something that big.
Got it. And you haven't had
Um,
raccoon issues at all?
we have a little bit. We had in yeah, last year when we picked the Brianna, we had it started to rain in the middle of the pick, so we just left the lugs in the vineyard. It was cool rain, so we left it out in the vineyard, and there were definitely critters that came along and pulled them out of the grape lugs and pulled grapes out onto the ground and ate some
Uh,
right there. So I've seen that, but I've not had like a really terrible problem with that. Birds, on
huh.
the other hand, are something completely
Oh, so are you netting then?
So we actually don't, but we use this thing called a bird guard, which is it simulates birds in distress. So
Oh,
it's the birds that we generally have problems with are like robins and bluebirds, and there are about seven different birds that this machine will make the sounds for. So we have a solar panel we hook to a battery, which hooks to this machine and broadcasts these sounds of these birds in distress. And it has two effects. It chases those birds away because they think that other birds are being murdered, and it also attracts the hawks, which the smaller birds see and they move farther out.
right,
Uh, but when the fruit is ripe, the birds will get in trees as close to the vineyard as they can and swoop through and grab a berry and go.
right.
And we had a problem last year where the bird guard device, or actually the solar panel failed, and the it stopped making the sounds. And we thought it was the battery, so we swapped out the battery. So it worked for a few days, and then it failed again. And the birds really came in and took over a whole block of Petite Pearl that we had. So they left
Uh,
one vine with fruit on it and took everything.
wow,
Yeah, and
wow.
it was this year. It's just right at the end of the season. It's
Of
heartbreaking.
course, yeah, yeah. That's when they, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's what the vines evolved to do, right? To make themselves
Yeah,
attractive to birds right at that moment.
yeah. And something like
um,
Petite Pearl has really small berries too, so that's it's easy pickings.
oh man, oof. Now, I know we're just talking about the flora and fauna here, but bears? Do you have any bear issues?
There are bears in the area, but I haven't seen them here.
Okay.
A few years ago, we had a section of vineyard that was knocked down. This was after harvest and during a heavy snowstorm. Something had gotten in the trellising and pushed it over, and it was either a moose or a bear. But it actually, they're metal poles that were folded and pressed all the way to the ground. So imagine
Wow.
a T-shaped pole with wires at the top, and
Right.
four of them in the same row were just bent over to the ground to the east, just folded right over on the ground. So something got in there and pulled it down when there was no fruit. So that was
Something
kind of
big.
interesting. Something big that we didn't see, and it was during a really big snowstorm.
Wow.
Again, a place that you can see from the house, but it had no reason to look out there if there's nothing going on
Yeah.
in the window.
Yeah, and if it was night too, maybe you're
Yeah,
asleep or whatever. Huh. That it's yeah. These are the kind of things. I guess out here in California we don't often think about, but I love to hear how these are real challenges. And
yeah,
like the pest control is very different than our IPM strategy would
right.
is is geared to deal with out here. The dogs
No,
sound like a big thing.
and the deer problem. I mean, I've been in talks with one of my neighbors who's a bow hunter, and that's a strategy to take, to thin the herd of deer.
Right.
And they know if one has been killed there, that it's not a place that's favorable to them. Let's put it that way.
Ah, got it.
And
So
the deer
they
and the dogs really do keep that. The dogs running around the vineyard and leaving their scent around make a
help.
difference. The deer can tell that too.
Right. Yeah, I imagine, yeah, deer and other predators probably who are wary get that scent and yeah, at least they're more cautious, less
Yes.
likely to. Nice. Yeah, it seems like dogs are wonderful in many ways in that sense.
Yeah.
Um, so what are the things that you're finding having done this? How like you mentioned Brianna as one of the varieties that's doing really well. Are there others that are as long performing? It sounds like you're buying some grapes too, so your full production isn't coming from the vineyard yet.
Correct.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. It's
can
only
you talk?
about
Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
about 1,500 vines right now. So um,
1,500.
we've
Okay.
yeah, so we've got about an acre and a half under vine. We have to leave some open space and some space near the roads and things so we can get vehicles in there.
Got it.
But I also grown Baco Noir, which is it was bred to uh, help the French wine industry in the 1800s.
Yeah.
All three versions of Frontenac. So the Frontenac Gris is the what we have planted the most of. Blanc, which is just a row of that, and then Frontenac Noir, which we have about 4 or 5 rows of that. And they tend to go into our red blend. The reds go into the red blends. The
Got it.
the Frontenac Gris is pretty acidic grape. I mean, these all are pretty acidic. Uh, but then I planted other vines to kind of offset the acidity, some low acidic grapes. So grapes such as Prairie Star, which is pretty easy to grow, Alpenglow, and
Hmm.
Orion, which is a German grape. Those are
Hmm.
all very low acid. They're also low sugar, but they do add kind of a neutral. Uh, they don't add a lot to the flavor of the wine. The Prairie Star and Alpenglow more so than the Orion, but they also kind of offset that terrible bracing acidity that comes from Frontenac Gris.
Gotcha. So blend those in, and it sort of dilutes some of that acidity
Yeah,
without adding a ton of flavor.
right.
Um, yeah, that's
Yeah,
so. Do you? What is your strategy now? Like, are you continually trying new things? Do you have a bunch of trial varieties in a specific, in a block that you then propagate if they do well over time, or how? Yeah, like what's your strategy for trying to move forward without, losing everything?
yeah. So I think the vineyard here at this site is pretty well set. Now, one of the things I'm doing is
Oh,
working with other growers. So I'm trying to foster relationships, and I do have some growers in the next town. So I'm in the town of Londonderry, which is just to our west. And so I have two guys there that I'm working with. I'm trying to get them to put in, and they said they would put in about 5 acres of grapes there. I'm working with another set of people over on the seacoast to plant some other grapes there. So
oh
I
wow.
really do want to get to the point where, sourcing more and more local. And I do have some local sources, some which come and go, some which have gone. There's people up in Maine who've kind of come in and uh, taken at least one of my sources of grapes because they're willing to pick the grapes, and I'm not. Just at harvest time, I can't go pick everybody's grapes and bring them back here.
Right.
Um, but yeah, that's my strategy: is specifying what grapes I will buy and what ones I think will do well on the given sites that these people are planting vineyards, and then working with them to make them successful because they're going to make me successful.
Nice. And so so you said 2006 was the Brianna. Is that the oldest vines that you've got at the moment?
Yeah, the Baco Noir and the Brianna are
Both
the two oldest.
2006.
Yeah,
Brianna's a white, or is it a pink grape? I
it's
forget.
a white grape. It's a white
It's a
grape.
white grape.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. So
Baco I'm familiar with. Baco was bred for black rot resistance. Is that right? Do I have
yeah,
that right? Is that
yeah,
and
and kind of as a replacement for Pinot Noir in France when they're having a phylloxera problem.
got it. Yeah.
And it's
I'm a
interesting that it was bred, and once they figured out you could put European grapes on American rootstock, they made it illegal again in France.
exactly.
Yeah, so we don't have those restrictions that they have in
Right.
Europe.
Yeah. And it's what was I going to say? It's how does it do there? I mean, how is it in terms of the wine quality? High acid, I'm imagining,
It's
as you said.
slightly high acid, but I can let this. So both of those grapes, the Brianna and the Baco Noir, will hang a long time.
Okay.
Uh, the Baco Noir uh, has fairly thick skin, so it will hang a long time. It's not like Pinot Noir that the skins slip off and start falling
R-
off the vine and berries start coming off, shelling as
Right.
we call it.
Right.
Brianna, when it's physiologically ripe, regardless of what the chemistry is, it's time to pick it because otherwise you're not getting any of the skins tend to thin out as they ripen, and the winged insects like hornets and wasps and even honeybees drill in and drink that juice.
Wow. Got it.
So there's other pests involved. So
Yeah.
you know, I can learn. I've learned that grape by taste now, and just observing the ripening schedule. And Brianna's one
Right.
of these that kind of ripens along nice and slowly. And okay, there's all of a sudden this spike where the sugar goes up and the acid comes down, and they're physiologically ripe, and you've got to get them all in.
Right.
And
Nice.
so we're cropping that one at about, and I just did the calculation this year, about 5.5 tons per acre. So we don't have a full acre of it, but we got over 2 tons. We have about 2.1 tons of it on about 400 vines this year. So it's a very productive grape,
Oh wow.
uh,
Yeah, and
and
that's
it's
and it's
a-
it's
and
not
that's the one on
too
my
young anymore
homepage.
either.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah. So
Nice.
if you look at our homepage on our website,
What is
the
what's your website?
it's apollovineyards.com, and
Hey,
it's
all right.
Apollo is spelled differently than you've ever seen it. Two P's and one L, like Apple, I say.
Yeah, Appolo.
Yep.
Okay, and that
And
picture of you holding, I guess that's you holding a bunch of grapes. That's Brianna.
yep, actually, that's one of my friends holding the grapes.
Okay,
He took that great
nice.
picture with that
Yeah,
200-year-old barn in the background.
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And so, yeah, when they're physiologically ripe, it's time. Nobody's going to wait for that.
Gotcha. Now, you make some sparkling too. Are you using those grapes for the sparkling?
Yeah, so I made actually for this year I made three different wines out of this grape. I made so we took the the brightest orange. So these grapes, when they get enough sunlight, they'll actually turn orange. So we
Okay.
took the most orange clusters and set those aside, and we made a a pet nat out of it. So we made an orange pet nat, which means we crushed the fruit, we put it into a fermenter with a lid to keep the insects out, and let it naturally ferment. And this is the ultimate test of what's going on in the vineyard in terms of yeast that's there, in terms of what any kind of contamination. And what happened was we got the day after we crushed it, we left it outside. It was cold, like 50 degrees, and rainy, so miserable kind of cold weather. And it spontaneously fermented, and inside of 10 days fermented to dryness.
Wow.
So, um,
Fantastic.
yeah, so it's and we call that wine lightning bug. So we have a sparkling wine called Firefly, and I'll talk about Firefly in a minute. So lightning bug is just completely it's a pet nat. We did add some sugar, about 2% sugar, and then bottled it so that we would get a sparkling wine out of it. And so it's an
Yeah.
orange sparkling pet nat. The only thing that we added, no yeast to it, no sulfites to it. It just a little bit of sugar to get it fermented in the bottle. And it's a fun wine.
Yeah.
Actually, the
I
guy
think I
holding the grapes on that website is one of the guys that said, "You need to do this, Mike."
Nice. Did I try that? I think I might have tried
I
that
think you
and
might have
enjoyed.
tried that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I enjoyed all your wines, so I can't say anything specific other than they were all great. So
Nice.
yeah, no, it's the quality is very nice, but it also, what you're talking about does speak to that the vitality of the microflora in the vineyard. And that also made me think about, a lot of times people who are trying to do what you're doing will focus on that vitality, like trying to enhance the vine's natural vitality by, maybe not using anti thing sprays, but using pro thing sprays, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm being very technical in my language here.
Yeah.
um, more probiotics, more
Yeah.
fertility enhancements, things like that, just to give the vine its own fighting chance from within. Having like not tilling, so that it's got a connection in the soil with lots of different soil microbiota, and a connection to all the soil microbiome within the vineyard to be able to transfer nutrients and micronutrients around as needed.
Right.
Is this your focus as well? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So yeah, we've done things like compost tea. Some of the folks that are planting one of those vineyards out on the seacoast have helped me with make some compost tea that they put down in certain vineyard areas of the vineyard where there's soil compaction, and that's loosened some things up. This year specifically, we had a very severe drought. So I remember I said last year and this year were two very different years in terms. One rain didn't stop raining, one didn't rain at all,
Right.
and we turned out more fruit this year than we did last year, even though it was a severe drought. I think because of the soil biology, that what we're finding out, and what these folks are much more into farming and into the soil chemistry than I am, is that the fungus that's under the ground actually helps that the plants transfer all that stuff. So if we're not
Right.
if you're dumping copper and sulfur, that kills fungus on top of the ground that gets down in the ground, and it makes the plant weaker because it's not getting resiliency from below, which is where the immune system of the plant is. A lot of it's below the soil line.
Right.
And so, like I said, this is a 200-year-old farm. And so there have been lots of animals here over the years, and not many in the few years that I've owned it, 20 years. But there have been lots of animals here in the past, so I've not done a lot in terms of uh, adding any kind of fertilizer to the soil. Uh, we're just trying to let the soil recover on its own.
Huh.
Um,
That's
one of
yeah.
the, one of the things we do is add, and I've planted this often, is clover to put some nitrogen in the soil.
Yeah.
Get a very natural way to let it grow.
So are you just mowing then to keep things
Yeah,
from becoming overgrown?
yeah,
Okay.
and I hire kids to mow between the vines, and
Okay.
um, and as almost everything here is growing, we do grow some VSP, which is vertical shoot positioning, is pretty much everything you see in Napa and Sonoma. That's
Yeah.
VSP.
Right. Right.
But I kind of train grapevines up in a different way. So almost everything is about, I'd say, eye level or chin level for me.
Okay.
So the fruit's fairly up high. All the new buds that come out in the spring that I want to foster are going to be up that high, which helps when we get a late frost. And so the late frosts, I've had whole sections of the vineyard that I had grafted over, and the graft was growing really well, and got a late frost and it killed all of them. And on either side, we had these high train vines with fresh shoots that weren't touched, they weren't burned off by the frost.
Right.
So we're doing all kinds of things that they're quite a bit different, and a lot of people would say, thinking outside the box a little bit. And the other thing it does is, it's fairly easy to harvest the fruit because you can do it standing up straight.
Right.
You're
Yeah.
not bent over. You're not sitting on the ground if you can help it.
Right. So chin to eye height for you is what, 5.5, something like that? 5.5 feet?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
Okay. 60 something inches around there.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. I'm 6'2", so it's
there you go.
I
That'll
mean,
give
I mean,
some
at the most
some
things are under
scale,
six
right?
feet tall. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you could be 4'11 and chin height would be very different too.
yeah.
um, okay, good. Just wanted to clarify.
Well, one of my
So,
neighbors' moms came by, and she's Korean, and she was wearing a hat and walked completely under the vines,
right.
which
Yeah.
and had her picture taken there with grapes on her hat.
Nice, nice. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, it's true. It does. I mean, I'm thinking about this as well. If you have to plant, out of reach of deer, that also might mean you're out of reach of, some of the people
He,
that you might want to help you pick the grapes in the
yeah,
fall or prune.
right.
So you kind of like restricting your labor force to, people over 5.5 feet tall or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, so the I sort of stopped you from going on to talk about your other wines, but please continue from the pet nat. You were going to tell me about,
Oh, yeah.
I forget
So
the next one.
yeah, so we took it was about I would say about half a ton of grapes that we took to make the lightning bug, which is the pet nat Brianna.
Yeah, right.
And then we took and we
The firefly.
crushed, yeah, the other almost 2 tons, and we made Firefly, which is so we crushed it. We do a cold soak overnight, and that cold weather really did a good job for a cold soak. And then we press it. But so what we do is we take the free run juice, and that becomes the Firefly, which is a really light sparkling wine. Uh, it's almost everything I let spontaneously ferment, and then I add a cultured yeast to it on top of that to make sure that it finishes.
Uh-huh.
And so that is the sparkling wine. We have to do a certain amount of that, so it's bottled at another winery, and there's a minimum amount that I could take there to make it worth both of our whiles. So I did add a little bit of the pressed juice to that. So it's mostly, and I would say 95% uh, free run juice. So you crush it it goes in the press. What's running out on its own is free run juice, and we separate that juice from the pressed juice. And the pressed juice went and became the still wine Brianna.
Okay.
Uh, we also did a couple of other things. We took the skins that were pressed and we gave them to a local brewery, and they made a goza out of them at Rockingham
Oh,
Brewery.
nice.
Yeah, and then
Nice.
a brewery over in Nashua took a little bit of the juice and some of the skins, and they put it into another. I'm sorry, both those are beers. Both those beers, or maybe two, but it's a brewery called Tailspinner in Nashua, and they haven't yet released that. They're going to release that for their anniversary in February. So,
Good.
doing a lot of collaborations with my favorite uh, wonderful tasting grape. And the goes is, I beg people for years to do a goes with me, and I just love that style beer.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that sounds lovely. I'm looking also on your website since I was here looking at the Brianna grapes, and there's this one photo that I think really conveys, I think, what looks like an amazing tasting experience potential, where I think I see the old, Concord wild vine trained over the pergola at one end, and then sort
Yep.
of umbrellas, an outdoor tasting area right in the middle of the vines next to the old barn. That's lovely looking.
Yeah. So
How
they used.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So
Good.
there used to be a building there that there was a
Oh,
they called
that's
the
like an old foundation kind of thing?
it wasn't one time, but in order to make the patio work, we had to tear it up. So in
Oh, okay.
2016, I left left the software company that I worked for and decided to do this full time. And so it was already there. I'd already had offset from that. And so we tore up that old foundation and turned it into a patio, which I call the crush pad. So I can't believe nobody has made a tasting room called the crush pad before. So this is the crush pad, and we serve wine outside in the
Uh-huh.
middle of the vineyard. And because it's no spray vineyard, you can walk into the vineyard and pull the grapes, and and see what's going on there. And we do tours into the
Nice.
grapes, and specific tours where we pour the wines in the vineyard that is growing right next to where I'm pouring. Um, and so within that we do have some grassy area. We put up a tent this year to keep the rainy days less. And even though I said it did rain sometimes in
Right,
September.
right. Yeah,
Uh,
when you people back east say it doesn't rain, it's very different from when we say
oh
it
yeah,
doesn't rain out here.
yeah, yeah.
We
I get
literally
that.
mean it hasn't rained for 10 months. Like,
Yeah,
although I'm saying that as it's raining, so it's kind of nice right now. But
yeah.
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
And so in that same photo, you can see the grapevines off pretty much both sides of the patio is Brianna, and so as you're looking at the photo, on the left is the south, on the right is the north. To the east, which is would be behind the photographer, and this is taken by a drone, but there's more Brianna there,
Okay.
and then
Okay.
and that 200-year-old barn is the centerpiece that I rehabilitated since I've been here. Uh,
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah,
tore the
that's
roof off and put modern trusses in it. So
oh, got it. Yeah, it looks lovely. Yeah, really beautiful thing. Have you considered getting certified? Did you ever look into that in any form of certification, whether organic or beyond or whatever? Is that? I mean, I don't. I'm just curious. There's no real. I'm not saying you should at all, but I'm just curious if you looked into it and what. I mean, it seems like I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm just
it's
curious.
yeah, and I have, and I'm of two minds of it. Right, I like the idea of being certified organic. There's a lot of paperwork and a lot of proof that you're doing the right thing, but which is fairly easy to do. When you're doing
Yeah.
nothing, it's pretty easy to say I'm doing
Right.
nothing. uh, I had a
Right.
pesticide license for a while, and they kept showing up randomly and saying, "Show us your records." I was like, "What record? Your
Right.
spray records?" I don't have any. Well, you must have some. You have a license. No, I don't. So anyway, there's that whole thing, and then, but the second mind is that I've had, and I don't know if you have the same experience, but I've had um, organic wines that are just absolutely terrible. That
Mm,
they probably shouldn't be shipped. They shouldn't be sitting on store shelves. They're not being handled properly, and so the organic. I don't know if you've had the same thing or not, Adam, but some of the organic wines are just absolutely insipid, and
Oh yeah.
spoiled, yeah, and
Yeah.
oxidized, and there's all kinds. There's hundreds of flaws, right? You know, have affect
Right.
these wines, and
Well,
so I think it's kind of
yeah,
gotten a bad rap,
yeah, I
honestly.
think you're right. I mean, and you bring up a really good point because I've found that quite a bit as well. Absolutely because of the labeling law. So and this is the thing. I keep forgetting that I should sort of clarify this when I ask this question, but I care so little about wineries being certified organic or whatever because that's actually one of the requirements to be able to make an organic wine that says organic wine on the label or made with organic
Right,
grapes. You have to certify the winery, which I don't care about. It's like that is where I've heard, I haven't been through the process myself, but I've heard it's just onerous. Yeah, like I guess when I ask, I'm always thinking vineyards, which is a separate certification, and that way you can't really say anything on the bottle unless what I've found is unless you list ingredients, and then you can say one of the ingredients is organic grapes. But
yeah,
other than that, you can't say organic, on the label. So it doesn't help you, if you're just trying to sell a bottle that way. So it kind of only helps with your marketing because you can say certified organic vineyards, you can put that all over your website and marketing materials. You just can't put it on your labels unless you also certify the winery, which I think is kind of, I don't know. But if
yeah,
you do go that route and you want to put organic wine on your label, the only way to do that is to not add sulfites. And I think that's
right,
given the whole organic brand in terms of wine a bad rap because you have all this zero sulfite wine that actually maybe wasn't made. It was maybe made more conventionally, but then they just didn't add sulfites, and
right,
so you don't have the benefit of sort of like the protections that natural wines, I think, that the best made natural wines sort of go through to still retain their beauty in bottle despite not using sulfates.
correct.
Um, but even those, I mean, there's still an argument to be made that it's still very challenging and risky to not use sulfates, regardless of what precautions you take. I think,
Right.
though, but yeah, that is a really good point. There's a You're not the first person that I've heard that from, and it does seem to be, especially outside, the wine circles where we're most informed about why these things happen. Like just to the lay public, it's yeah, that's been my experience as well. Like that a lot of people feel if it says organic on it, it's probably bad in terms of
Yeah.
wine.
Yeah.
Bad.
I
Well,
thought it would be interesting to just grab a couple of wines off the store shelf and test their SO2 to see, see what
oh
what's
yeah.
still in the bottle,
Yeah.
on the grocery store test
So you did
because
this.
no, I
Or you,
will, but
oh, okay.
I plan to do it. I'm doing a set of tests this week, so I thought, no, I'm just going to
I'm
grab a
very
couple of
curious.
bottles of wine and open them and take a
Oh, I'd love
sample
to
and see
know.
see what they are because I think my a New Zealand wine. I'm curious if it's. And I know they have different limits than we do here in the U.S., but that wine
Interesting.
traveled a
Yeah.
long way to get here.
Right. Right. And yeah. Yep. That's a really good point. Oh, I'd be really curious. Let me know what you find out. I'd be
Yeah, especially
very curious
yeah,
about.
so the sweeter wines, the sweet, the
Oh man.
$9 store shelf wines that everybody, that people say is great. They're a little bit sweet, they're
Yes.
a little
Oh
bit
yeah.
the cab that's a little bit sweet. I'm just really
Oh yeah.
curious how much sulfite is in it.
Yep. Me
Not that
too.
I want to drink the wine, but
Right.
I want to know.
But I want to test it. Yeah. Well, this is great. Can you tell? I mean, can you tell at this point? I mean, what are the plans for what you're doing? Are there viticultural practices that you have found make this more possible? Like you said, sort of those management and whatever it is, like the cultivation tactics that you're using. Not cultivation
Yeah,
as in
so
plow, but
it's kind of interesting the way I learn something every time I go to a winery or a vineyard and get a tour because people are doing all kinds of things that nobody writes about, nobody listens to,
yeah,
nobody knows that they're doing. And one of the interesting ones that I could flash back on is I don't know if you ever saw the movie Blood into Wine,
I
but
think I have. Yeah.
yeah, it's about Arizona wine, and
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, Maynard James Keenan is growing wine and making wine, and he's a rock star and all this other stuff. But he
Right.
says at some point, he says, we haven't gotten to the point in the vineyard where we don't have a cluster touching a cluster and leaves touching clusters. And I thought, wow, I wonder why he said that. And then, kind of observationally myself, and this is what, that movie's about 14 years ago, or maybe longer than
Yeah.
that. Observationally, the ones that are in the sunlight do much better, and they taste better, and they have no rot and so on. So one of the things I spent a lot of money in the vineyard this year, having leaves pulled around all the clusters and getting everything out at least part of the day in the sunlight. So
Right.
peeling back the leaves from the leaf above the clusters all the way down to where the shoot came out of the base of the
Yeah.
vine, or out of the last year's shoot, and showed these guys when we were picking the fruit. These are the ones you guys got to. These are the ones that we couldn't get to. Look at the difference in how hard it is to pick this fruit. It's what we do is we'll pull off bad berries when we're harvesting, and the ones that have
Mm.
had leaves touching them are terrible in terms of soft berries and things that are spoiled. But the ones that are out in the sunlight, just there's nothing wrong with them. It's like that. There are thousands of clusters like that one on the homepage there.
Wow. I
So
love that.
so
Okay.
that's a big deal. The
Yeah.
leaves, getting the leaves off the fruit is a big deal when you're not spraying anything in the vineyard, and
What what is the
getting it.
timing? Sorry, go ahead.
So I'll talk about timing too, but that's a big part of it. Getting the suckers, so the shoots that come from the base of the vine are down low on the vine where you don't want them. Getting rid of
Right.
those early in the year. I had a vineyard manager work here a few years ago, and he spent, he had two workers working with him, and they spent the month of July cutting shoots that were the size of my little finger, in diameter, and
Oh
4
yeah.
feet long from these vines. Whereas if they'd have done it a month earlier, they just rub them off with your finger or a pair of clippers. You just snip them off and let them lay.
Yeah.
But they hauled lots and lots of greenery out of the vineyard that year from down low on the vine where it should never have been allowed to grow. So those two things make a world of difference in terms of the vine health and where you want to focus the energy of the vine, and then also making sure that only the fruit that you want to ripen is what you leave on the vine.
Right. Yeah, I imagine if you had like a super vigorous variety, or you're just, a vine that was in a very vigorous soil or conditions where you were getting overproductive, maybe letting those suckers grow long before cutting them off might be a way to help devigorate the
All
vine
right. Yeah.
initially. But yeah, if you're trying to get it to focus its energy and stuff, it's sort of like, yeah, thinking about these things. I always think about them as like, so when I hear somebody like you talk about it and how you did this to do that, and then I'm like, well, that might not work in every instance, but at least it's now in people's mind as like a lever that they can pull,
Right.
depending on their circumstance, whether they pull it this way or that way, or when they pull it, might be very different from you, but at least it's a good thing to think about. It's a good thing to be aware of as a control factor.
Yeah,
Are
and even
you
in terms of expense, it was a lot more expensive for me to pay those people to get rid of the suckers in July than it would have been
very
in
good
May.
point. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, just for practical reasons, right?
yeah,
Good
yeah.
point.
And in July, I want them pulling leaves. And you mentioned the timing, pulling the leaves as soon as it sets fruit. Start pulling those leaves from around the fruit, so they get up to size, or maybe about half the diameter of the berries.
Uh,
That's usually when we start pulling leaves around it. And maybe this year a little bit sooner because of the amount of time required. It sounds like a very simple thing, but it requires thought, and unless you supervise, especially the teen, I have some teenagers working here. Just you supervise them, they tend to take all the leaves off a shoot, which means that that fruit doesn't ripen.
right.
So,
Right.
you want the ones out on the end. You, don't want you just want them from here to here. Oh, I thought
Right.
you wanted them all off. No, no.
Oh man. Yeah, that's so when you started talking about how you're sort of doing you're dropping berries and things, and you're cleaning up the clusters, doing a sort of sort in the vineyard as you're
Yep,
picking.
yep.
I imagine, or I guess my question is, does someone who goes into this commitment of no spray need a certain tolerance for loss? Like, do you have a percentage that even if your vineyard sets X amount of fruit, 15% of that is you're already planning on not being able to harvest because of whatever reason, or
Well,
do
I
you
think
have that kind of calculus, or are you thinking in that way?
Well, I would set a number, but I would be wrong. Let's put it that way.
Right, right,
Because I don't think anybody can set that number. I don't think even in
right,
conventionally farmed vineyards that they can say that how accurate they're going to be on their even to right before the harvest, how much fruit is there? Because you can estimate, but it's just an estimate. And
right,
so a crop loss estimate because you're doing organic is a different a different beast altogether. You don't it's you're assuming a certain amount of risk just by doing it in the first place, and
yeah,
you're assuming more risk if things go terribly bad and you lose the whole crop, right? But there's
right,
lots of reasons you lose a crop. Hurricanes can destroy a crop. This Brianna, if in 20 what was a few years ago when we had hurricane come through just days before we harvested, and it was lucky we got the fruit off because the berries would just explode, and that would happen regardless of how this was farmed, right? Those berries would explode like tomatoes. Yeah, you don't have the rain algorithm out there in California, but when you have a tomato plant and you get a lot of rain, those tomatoes that are ripe will they'll just split, and same things happen with
right,
grapes, and so that would happen regardless. But
right,
hate to venture a number. I just place all my bets in terms of how resilient certain varieties of grapes are, and then focus on ones that I think that will survive a variety of things happening to
right.
them. And so, and there's a lot to be said for the breeders out there who have done this work. That
Mm,
so we talk about hybrids, and I think that a lot of people have uh, not necessarily a bad taste in their mouth, but funny ideas about GMO and hybrid, and these are really two different things.
right,
And GMOs are very much uh, a- organisms that were made so that you can spray toxic chemicals on them. And
right.
generally, we don't have a problem with that. It's the part that they spray toxic chemicals on them that we have the
That's
problem with.
right.
And then people are eating those.
Right,
Hybrids are, they were bred. They wanted this parent and this parent to come up with a new
right,
variety, and then they planted 100 of those, and out of those, these five were the ones that showed promise. And at the end of the day, anywhere between 0 and 3 of those, or 0 and 2 of those, are something they selected and decided, this is something that we should move forward as a named variety of grape, or a numbered variety of grape, to see how it does. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it just doesn't.
right.
For a variety of reasons. There are things that were developed in Minnesota do really well here, but
Yeah.
the offside is that some of them tend to break dormancy earlier on the East Coast than they do out in Minnesota, and so
Ah,
which means it's not good for everywhere if that's the case.
right, right.
And so um, uh, learned a lot about dormancy and what sets it on a pivot.
Yeah, I remember that the deacclimation rate panel
Yeah,
we must have
yeah,
both sat in on. That was
yeah,
really fascinating. Just cool to think about when you're, especially as we're dealing with, a world in which we're probably going to see more and more extremes, both of warm and cold. So, and at
yep,
weird times, at unpredictable, not normal times, not consistent times. So we'll have warm in February when it should be cold, and then cold in April when it should be warm.
right.
And if you have that on a vine and the warm in February causes it to start pushing, then and then in April you're going to lose everything that pushed if you have a big heavy freeze. So it's finding these. Yeah, that panel was really fascinating, just in finding these varieties and breeding with this deacclimation rate in mind, a slower deacclimation rate. So the vines that naturally come out of dormancy much slower. So a warming trend in the middle of the winter isn't going to trick them into coming out of dormancy.
Yeah.
That they'll maintain a slower rate so that if it gets cold again, they're fine, they're protected. And I thought that was just fascinating. Something that, again, like you said, there's just so many things you learn and can and the breeding. I love that you're giving credit to the grapers. I'm now just fascinated with grape breeding and talking to a lot of them. We're gonna have a few on future podcast episodes
Oh,
of
cool.
this. Yeah, just to talk about what people are doing in different areas. Tom Plocker, I interviewed actually, and he's the reason I ended up at Vineyard. And
Oh, cool.
yeah, so that was kind of fun just to meet him and then to taste so many of different wines from all over the country that are growing his grapes, that he
Yeah,
bred
yeah.
in Minnesota,
Yeah, I'm one of
a
Tom's
couple
fans.
decades ago.
I'm really one of Tom's fans because
Yeah,
what he's doing is he's not just thinking, oh, this is going to be a resilient vine. This it has to be commercially viable grape that you can make into a wine that people will buy. Otherwise, it
yeah,
doesn't matter. You can make
yeah.
grape juice out of it, but Welch's has that market pretty well cornered in this country.
Right. Right. Yeah, definitely. And you're growing that, right? You're growing a Petite Pearl.
Yep.
Anything else of his?
I don't believe so.
And it's
I don't.
doing well for you?
Yes, yeah. Other than the bird problem, but that's not his problem. And
Right, right. That might
it hangs well, and it produces a really great wine. I mean, I have enough that we have a little bit in barrel right now,
nice.
but
Yeah,
I
I mean
bought some from Rhode Island.
the bird problem could be indicative of really tasty grapes actually.
Yeah, yeah,
Might be a might be a good sign actually.
yeah. Great aromatics, so they could smell it in the wind. So there's something going on
Uh
there. And
nice.
yeah, I bought some of that grape from a grower in Rhode Island a few years ago, and just made a straight varietal Petite Pearl wine out of it. And it was one of the fastest growing wines I've ever made. I mean, fastest selling
Wow.
wines I've ever made. It just people were coming in and buying a whole case of it at a time. I mean, they did it with
Yeah.
other they did it with cabs and things I grow from California fruit, but the and different wines, but this is like the people are still asking about when you gonna have a Petite Pearl wine again. So
Nice. Yeah.
I'm keen on both these growers I mentioned growing that grape because I have no doubt that I could make a good wine from it and sell it.
Well, maybe as a closing question for you, I mean, as you said, when you told people what you're doing, you got a lot of, well, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Or just like, yeah, you're crazy. Good luck, kind of thing. Have you come up with a response to that? I mean, obviously you are doing it, so that's some form of response. But I mean, how has that shaped how you talk to folks who disbelieve, that this is possible or you know, just think you're crazy for trying it.
Well, there's a couple different things going on. The some of the folks said, it's going to be very difficult to do. They're not saying it's impossible. They're saying it's difficult to do.
Right.
And then they've tried the wines and they went, "Wow, there's something going on here." And then they've actually and not many people are going Brianna. So I'm one of the first in New England to grow Brianna. As a matter of fact, that one of the nurseries that was at Vineyard, he got his cuttings from me years ago, like in
Oh
I
wow.
don't know, maybe 2009, so maybe that winter, or maybe earlier than that. Uh, and uh, but I've grown that grape. They know I grow it without sprays. They love the way the wine tastes. That you can make a dry wine from it, and um, that there's really a uniqueness to it that's grown here, and it tastes different than it is other places. But the fact that you can do that was kind of surprising to everybody. But then there's the younger folks that are coming along who have said, one of the guys that was at Vineyard, he's got his own winery now, his own label, and said that the reason he moved back to New Hampshire is because he tasted my Brianna wines and realized, okay, it is possible there. And so he's planting vineyards here in the state and making his own wines and charting his own course as a much younger man than me. And so influencing that next generation of growers and winemakers who want to make this a wine destination, want to make this a place that people understand wine comes from and is unique to this place is pretty cool to me. So you got kind of both ends of that spectrum.
That's
Um,
great.
in the early days, though, I'm not saying that they were anywhere near abusive or anything like that, but often you feel like the village idiot. You're doing something that everybody says, no, you're not. That's just a dumb thing to do.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
kind of see people kind of look at each other and look at you, and you go,
No, I
is
mean,
this really something worth doing?
I just want to interject. Like, I want you to finish that thought, but I want to interject when I've talked to people about this, when I've talked to people about people like you who are doing this, like the reaction that I get from, people with entire careers in wine academics and in all, it's like a smug, well, yeah, no. I
Yeah,
mean, it's really
yeah,
like there's a total confidence that you will be proven wrong. You know what I mean?
oh yeah, yeah.
That it will ultimately end in utter failure, and I'm just like, I mean, I laugh to myself when I encounter that, because I'm just like, well, yeah, because it's so short-sighted to me. It's like,
Right.
I mean, like, clearly it's possible. I mean, yeah. Anyway, so
Yeah,
but
and
it
not,
is
not only
like,
possible but successful. It's one
right,
thing to make
right.
that something that's just, oh, it's mediocre. Yeah, that's great. But it's quite another thing to have people go, wow, you got something completely unique here, and
Yeah.
it's it's surprisingly good. Like they're surprised that it's good, but I don't know why they're so surprised.
It's almost an insult.
Yeah,
Wow, this is actually good.
yeah. Well, and
Backhanded
the
compliment.
yeah, and then yeah. Oh, this isn't bad. That's my favorite one. No, this isn't bad. Does that mean it's good? uh, but the other, the other thing that excites me is this younger generation coming up, and they're. Um, I offered up my peaches, in I have a few peach trees here in the vineyard. I offer up to one of the guys that's making, starting to make fruit wines and such, and he brought along somebody that works with them, and I heard him say, "This is the example of where we're trying to go in terms of doing it the right way," and this is because we know it can be done. This is where we're going, and I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. Well, how would people come and try this wonderful wine that you're making? Is it reservation only? Do you have tasting room hours?
Yeah, so
Where what's the town that you're in?
we're in Derry, New Hampshire. So
Derry.
it's
Like,
yeah. So if you come up I-93 from Boston or down I-93 from the mountains, we're between exits 3 and 4.
okay.
And yeah, well, people often ask what exit, but we're 35 miles north of Boston, so inside of an hour you can get from Boston to here unless it's rush hour.
Nice.
And yeah, you can go on our website and make a reservation, and or you can just you can go there and buy wines and have them shipped to you. We ship to about 40 states. Um,
Fantastic.
we're going to shut down a little bit for the winter, so it's going to be a little bit different this year. I'm going to shut down for a bit and take some mental health time and do some snowboarding and spend some time with my kids and grandchildren and my wife. Take a little bit of time off. This has
Nice.
been a very very busy year, and
Mm,
uh, yeah, and so those are the two ways they can get involved. In the summer, or in the spring, we'll open back up. We'll have tasting room hours. Things are fairly slow until May, and then
yeah.
once it starts in May, we really do suggest a reservation anytime you want to come here, because people all tend to want to be here at 2 o'clock on a Saturday, and it's just not possible. It's you
Right.
know people show up and
And
we're
they have to wait.
yeah, and they're not happy about that. But
Yeah.
and and sometimes people, I won't say they overstay their welcomes, but people will hang out for 3 or 4 hours.
Right,
Um,
right. Yeah.
yeah, and we're in the process. I'm working with I have worked with the legislature in the past to change some of the laws. We're trying to change the law to allow selling a bottle of wine so people can share a bottle of wine over and so on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I didn't
which
realize
is
that. What? Yeah.
yeah, every state's different. In Massachusetts, you can do that. In New Hampshire, you can't. There's lots of very different rules here in New Hampshire. New Hampshire is we call a prohibition state. If it wasn't made legal after prohibition, it is not.
Right. Right.
So there's a lot of that going on.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for this. And that's Apollo Vineyards, Appolo Vineyards with an S.com for more info. Any other ways that you want people to get in touch or anything like that, or is that the best way?
That's the best way. I mean, you can always Google us, see what's going on, watch us on Facebook or Instagram, and
Awesome.
see what we're up to. We'll do, that part of the. I'm saying when I'm taking time off, we're taking time off out of the tasting room, but we'll still be bottling wines through the winter. And
Right. Yeah.
a lot of people ask about specifically certain wines. We have fortified wine that's made with Shiraz that people are asking a lot about. We're doing lots of I do lots of red wines in barrel. We do lots of sparkling wines, lots of still wines of every shade. So orange, pink, white, red, and so we're very inclusive in that in our wine drinking and making. Uh,
Sparkling,
yeah,
still, all of
sparkling
the above.
still. Yeah, we have
Sweet,
sparkling
dry.
Pinot Noir, which is red wine, which is
Nice.
surprising most people. Yeah.
Oh, that
So
sounds great.
all those different ways, or just you can order some wine online if you're really into especially the organic wine, or you see what Brianna tastes like. You can order them online and see what they're like.
I love that.
Yeah, I mean a lot of we've seen especially the Fireflies won silver medal 2 years in a row. The
Nice.
2022 is not available yet, but it will be probably in the spring. Yeah, so a lot of medal winning wines. So it's other people will tell me they're good, not just me.
No, I enjoyed them very much. Yeah, yeah. Not a bad wine in the bunch.
All
Is
right,
that
thanks,
enough of
Adam.
a backhanded compliment
Yeah,
to match the?
yeah,
No, they're really, really good. Again, your wines were. I was pretty picky with what I tasted at Vineyard. Yours were one of them, and I'm glad that it
oh,
was.
thank you.
Yeah, no, it's great, and I mean, really, like you among pretty much everything I had just really drove home for me this idea that the idea that we're trying to make distinctions between vinifera and hybrids at this point in terms of the market and the quality is just ridiculous. There is no difference in quality.
Yeah,
These are as good as anything you can taste anywhere. So
yeah.
yeah, just delicious wines.
Oh, thank you.
Hands
Yeah,
and full stop.
yeah,
um, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I like to tell people that that we talk about hybrids of these grapevines that are bred. Cabernet Sauvignon is a hybrid of
right, right. Yeah,
Sauvignon
all grapes are
Blanc and
hybrids,
Cabernet
right?
Franc. It is a hybrid. It is bred
Yeah,
between these two vines.
yeah,
Genetically, we know that to be true.
right.
So then don't shake your head because it's a hybrid. It's
Right.
yeah. They're all hybrids. They're all and like people, we're all mutts at some level, right?
Yeah. 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 That's good. I like that. Well, thank you, Mike. I really
All
appreciate this conversation. Thanks for doing what you're doing too, and keep it up. I hope to come and check it out in the future
right.
and drink at the old barn there. That sounds
Yeah.
great. All
Yeah.
right.
Thank you very much. And yeah, you get to the Boston area.
All right. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. And if you did and would like to support this podcast, please do. There is a Patreon link in the show notes where you can subscribe with a monthly, very low subscription to add monetary support. Or please subscribe on your feed, wherever you listen to this podcast. Subscribe and follow this podcast so that you will automatically download it when each new episode comes out. That's one of the few metrics that we can measure to see the support and listenership of this. And otherwise, if you're already listening, subscribe, support, whatever, just a long-time listener, haven't done anything, please do a review. If you would, any positive review with 5 stars and a nice word is fantastic and helpful and really improves the algorithmic performance of this podcast. So thank you so much.